All right, hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Going Inside Live. I'm John Clark. I'm your host. I'm a licensed therapist. I'm a trauma therapist in particular. I'm also a group practice owner and a supervisor, a teacher. I'm many things, it appears. And today I'm excited to be back with you to answer your questions live. We've been doing this for a little while, and it's been really fun to interact with you all and to make sure that the content we're making really lands with what you all are thinking about and struggling with and needing from me. So thanks in advance for being here. A couple announcements before we jump into questions. You can jump into my weekly IFS program called Pathways to Self at johnclarktherapy.com/pathways. For a very limited time, you can jump in at the current pricing, which is set to go up again soon. And so if you want to join a community of like-minded peers, get access to our weekly consultation group where you're going to meet with me and a small group of practitioners on Zoom, then this is the place for you. If you're also looking to integrate IFS with other models like EMDR, somatic experiencing, etc., this is a great place. If you want help managing the therapeutic relationship and working psychodynamically, then this is also a good place for you. So hope you will consider joining, and I will see you in there. On that note, we just launched another program. We're doing a digital detox for therapists. And for 8 weeks, we're going to be doing a digital detox together. Whatever that means for you, reducing your phone use, reducing or eliminating social media for 8 weeks, whatever it might be. We're going to give your nervous system a reset and do a digital detox together while doing a weekly somatic IFS group. So it's basically like group therapy for therapists and practitioners. If you are interested in joining that program, let's see if I can find a link quickly to that and then hand that to you. So if you're interested in that, we've got early bird pricing that's available now, but that's going to go away soon. Here's the link. Yep, we've got it posted here. So there's a link to join. The early bird pricing is available now, but that's going to go up soon. So if you want to start the year off right, if you want to explore your own use of technology, social media, etc., help give your nervous system a reset so that you can be that co-regulated nervous system for your clients, then this is a good place for you. Also, if you want to learn more about IFS and somatic IFS, this is a good place to learn by receiving. So yeah, early bird pricing is up now, but that's going away soon. So if you're interested, jump in, and I'd love to have you join us. Now I'm going to open it up for questions. So if you're here live, make sure to ask your questions. I've only got one pre-submitted question, so I'll answer that first. But in the meantime, ask your questions in the comments, and I'll pull them up one by one. Okay, first question here is an anonymous question. The question is, can you speak more about integrating polyvagal theory / nervous system work into IFS? I often say parts can sometimes be associated with different nervous system states. So when the part with the overwhelm shows up, that's a sign to regulate. Can you give me your take on this? Let me address the second aspect of this question first. So when when dysregulation occurs, that means there's a part with overwhelm, right? Yeah, sure. That means there's potentially a part that is signaling something. It's not necessarily a sign to regulate or to directly regulate the part. From a pure IFS standpoint, that dysregulation is the trailhead, and you don't necessarily want to just shut down the trailhead. You want to actually go toward it and work with the activation, work with the dysregulation. You want to invite the part that is expressing through the body to be heard. So if you just go, okay, slow down and breathe and notice that and feet on the floor, right? Notice 5 things, whatever. You may get some regulation in the nervous system going, but you may also shut down that trailhead. That's my experience with it. So rather than directly kind of teaching regulation or trying to do regulation, quote unquote, I tend to see that as an opportunity to hear from the part, to go toward the part, let it know you're here by placing a hand where you're feeling that part in the body, etc. That's assuming there's enough self-energy to do that work and to meet that part. If not, maybe you do need to do some regulation work to cultivate enough self-energy to go back to the part. That's always possible. So different ways of looking at this. It of course it depends on your theoretical orientation. That's why I'm answering it through that lens. You know, ultimately it's about what works for you, right? You know, how regulated does a client need to be to do productive therapy, right? Or to do therapeutic therapy. That's a question, or a rhetorical question, you know, that you might wonder about. Yeah. Otherwise, you know, if you're thinking about integrating IFS with other models, nervous system models like polyvagal or SE or whatever, then generally I think you just want to start involving the body as much as possible into doing the work in a more embodied way. So the first step is just asking lots of questions that involve the body. So as you notice this part, where do you find it or notice it in or around your body, right? If there's a tension in the stomach, can you just put a hand there or let it know you're here? Or can you imagine if your hands had ears and you put your hand there on your stomach, could you just listen with your hand and see what happens? Can you just follow the tension? Does it move around? Does it stay in one place? As you go toward it, does it get louder or softer? Does it have a color or a texture to it? So you just start by interacting with it and tracking it, right? This is a lot of what SE does, is really just as a primary step, tracking sensation, noticing sensation, being with it. And when we're with it, it helps the nervous system to basically swing in and out of dysregulation in a fluid way. That's what regulation really is. The regulation is not being calm all the time. You know, there's times where we need lots of activation. If someone's trying to hurt me physically, I need lots of activation. And my nervous system needs to be firing at that point, right? If I'm too hypo-aroused, right, I might not do anything. I might freeze. So we're just noticing that nervous system states are fluid and natural and important. And there was a really good reason why, based on your history, your nervous system learned to fight, flight, freeze, fawn, whatever. But now in this co-regulation between client and therapist, we can rebuild some nervous system safety. I think a lot about window of tolerance whenever I'm doing this work, or just thinking about nervous system. So you might think about that as well. And you might talk to your clients about window of tolerance and show them, a diagram. I think things like that can be really helpful. You could have them embody a part and then move as if you are that part, right? You could also have them change your posture to show me what it would look like if you were more confident. So acting as if you were more confident and moving that way. Just encouraging your clients to move and be embodied in the session is working somatically. Yeah. Whether that's gentle sway or movement or tapping or bilateral stimulation, maybe they're just tapping left to right. There's so many ways to involve it. Maybe you're using essential oils. I don't know. Working with the visual system, right? So one that I like to do a lot is have your eyes completely focus on what's in front of you and then have them soften and take in your entire periphery, and then go back to collapsing the visual field. The orienting response, right, has a lot to do with trauma. What's the first thing we do when you hear a glass smash in the other room? You orient to it, right? So you can play around in those subtleties. You can have the client move. You can have them dance. You can use the breath. It's really pretty limitless. Yeah, great question. Okay, we have a live question from Riley. Riley, thanks for being here. Riley says, I have a client who's really struggling to conceptualize IFS and get out of cognitive forms of thinking. Any advice? Yeah, this is extremely common. What's the counter to thinking? It's feeling. So it's feeling and sensing. So if I have clients that have these strong thinker parts, then I might try to practice just getting them to feel and sense more. So as you, I had this client yesterday and we were going through this. So as you imagine yourself back there in the kitchen having that fight with your wife, what happens in your body? And he said, well, I think, and I stopped him right there and said, okay, so I think is a thinking word, right? And then I think, well, what could be good about just thinking, right? That's where he feels most safe, is thinking. So of course he answers the question of where do you know, what's happening in your body with I think, right? Because it's safer in my head. So at what point and why did it become so unsafe to be in your body? And we have to go there at some point. Or the part that's worried about you going into your body more, can the part tell you the story of when and how it became not so safe to be more in your body, right? And just in general and culturally, we're just so gosh darn cut off from our bodies anyway. So we're always working against that. We have a very top down culture, meaning like from the head down, thinking about my thoughts, thinking about my feelings, thinking about my body, right? Trying to tell it what to do versus really listening to it and the wisdom of your body and having a relationship with your body. So we honor the thinking part and trust that like there's a reason that's coming up and the client defaults there because it's their main way of being in the world and at work. It's their main way of figuring stuff out. It's their main way of getting information. And IFS has a lot to do with how we get information, right? Do we get information just by thinking? Do we get information by deepening and listening? Do we get information from like a higher source? What is self energy connected to? And things like that. So, you just, MI would call motivational interviewing would call this rolling with the resistance. I don't call it resistance, but the client goes, they're a strong thinker and analytical, type of person. Then we just roll with that and we use that. Yeah. And, the client does have to have some buy-in with IFS for it to work at all. And that buy-in can come either conceptually, they get it and they think this makes sense. This is a decent way to conceptualize human psychology and change. Or you help them experience IFS. And when they experience IFS, they go, now I have conviction. I don't know what the hell that was, but it worked. I felt something. I felt a shift, right? I was less impulsive in my life this week or whatever. And then they become a believer. All therapy has some form of placebo, right? And so there has to be some form of belief, or at least suspension of disbelief, in order to be helped. Yeah. It's a really good question. Thanks, Riley, for bringing that one. Folks that are here, go ahead and ask your next question in the chat and I'll wait for that next one. For folks that missed it, I also announced at the beginning, we're just launched our 8-week IFS or somatic IFS group for practitioners, where we're going to be doing a digital detox starting January 27th. We've got early bird pricing. It's available now, but that's going away soon. So link is there in the comments if you're interested in that, and it'll be in the description as well if you're listening to the audio later. But if you're interested in working with me, if you're interested in receiving somatic IFS, if you're interested in doing a digital detox together, this is a great time to jump in and join our new program. Okay. Another live question here. The question is, one of my clients, bipolar, diagnosed, and a lot of childhood attachment wounds, has a hard time connecting with her core self qualities, the 8 C's, especially self-compassion. Her baseline is anxiety. Yeah. I'll answer based on the last part of your question. Her baseline is anxiety. Just to shift that into IFS terms, we would just say she's blended with an anxious part or a part that carries anxiety. Because right off the bat, we have to separate a bit between self and parts. And in that separation comes more self, or at least more space for self energy to emerge. Part of why IFS works is it's inherently non-shaming. And so when we go, the client has an intellectual part or a drinking part or a part that's anxious or scared, right? That's inherently destigmatizing and de-shaming, creates more spaciousness in the system. So that inherently creates more compassion, going, I am not my anxiety. I told a new client this recently where I just said, it's almost like you're convinced that you are your anxiety. When I asked, how would you describe yourself? And she was like, oh, I'm an anxious person. So it's like, okay, so at your core, your deepest, inner wisdom, your soul is anxious. And of course she disagreed with me, right? But she's been so blended with that anxious part for so long that she's over-identified with it, right? This must be who I am, always worried. Come to find out it's not who you are. It's a part of you that is operating out of its polarity because of painful and intense life experiences. And the good news is we can unblend and unburden, and help can come. So they have a hard time connecting with their core self qualities, right? The self-compassion piece. Well, it's like self-compassion, self is compassion. Self is inherently compassionate. And if you can help her find some compassion, help her send that to the part that is anxious. And you really just want to lean into your 6 F's here as a way to create the scaffolding for IFS to really work. So can you focus in on the part? Where do you find it in or around your body? What does it look like, sound like? Flesh it out more. Can you ask it about its fears? Can you befriend it? How are you feeling toward it? Can you update the part, right? Ask it how old it is. Ask it how old it thinks you are, and on and on and on. So this work can take weeks or months. Finding parts, getting to know them, building trust with them, befriending them can take as long as it takes. It'll take, a time that is proportionate to the degree of trauma that's in their system generally. And the degree of trauma also equals the degree of polarization. Bipolar, keyword polar, polarization, right? Polarity. So you have a lot of polarization, parts that get really sad, parts that get really up, Yeah. You mentioned a lot of childhood attachment wounds. So again, that's going to mean the work just needs to be slower. Probably slower than you think, probably slower than you and the client would like. But that's the challenge, is for you to help her pace the work. Your job, part of your job as a therapist, is to really help them slow down and set the pace. Wounding happens fast. Healing has to be the counter, right? Everything is about the counter. What's the counterbalance to trauma? It's slowness and spaciousness and ease. And because trauma happens fast, too much, too soon, all of a sudden, the healing has to be the counter to that. Slow, steady, titrated, a little bit at a time, with no agenda. So she's got to befriend all those parts that are behind the wheel of the bipolar, the symptoms of the bipolar. Yeah. I mean, there's roughly 2 ways to get into self. One is to unblend. The other is to generate more self energy directly and then bring that to the parts, and then they will unblend as a result. So you just need to think about how you're trying to help her unblend. And there's a lot of ways to do that. You could have her intentionally blend or blend further and fully become the part. If she's already like 80% the part, you might have her just fully blend into that part. And then by doing that, you help her unblend. That's another way to do it. Again, you might work with the body more. You might work with play or expression or movement or art. Nature, you might get her in nature more. You might do IFS in nature. You might have her envision her children or an animal or whomever. Maybe she's got a lot of love for others in her life, you can use that love as a bridge to her own self energy that she can bring to her own parts eventually. The key is to get creative, right? Creative is one of our C words. Yeah. All right. You're very welcome. Yeah. My pleasure. Okay. We're gonna keep answering questions for another 10 minutes or so. So if you're here and you got a question, let me know in the comments. Just to say a little more about our digital detox group, part of my thinking around that was, I don't know if you're like me, but just seeing the insidious nature of technology in our lives, social media in our lives, and our children's lives. Um, it's just too easy to spend way too much time in our phones and on our devices and not in connection with one another. And as therapists, part of what we offer and why it works is connection. And yet, part of the counter to that, the counter vortex to that, is disconnection, right? Part of why clients are suffering and we suffer is disconnection, or even just fear of disconnection. So, therapy has to be a very connected place, a very connected experience. And in order to do that, we need to be as connected as possible to ourselves and to our parts, right? Yeah. So the idea is, in this digital detox group, to give you the space to connect with, first of all, the parts of you that are involved in your technology, your relationship to technology or addiction to technology, parts that need to be entertained, parts that need to be distracted, parts that always need to know what's happening in the news, parts that are always waiting for the horror of what's happening next in the news, parts that are hoping for good news, and on and on. So, hope you'll join us. Link is here in the comments for the digital detox group. Okay. I've got another question here that was submitted ahead of time. The person says, my client seems stuck in high anxiety. Whoops, I just had that. My client seems stuck in high anxiety and worry that they'll never get better. They struggle with lifelong depression. I've had the client go to this anxious part, and the part fears they'll never get better, but they get stuck at that point. Yeah. Okay. So the, yeah. Okay. So my client gets stuck in high anxiety and they worry they'll never get better. They struggle with lifelong depression. The client goes to this anxious part and the part fears they'll never get better, but they get stuck at that point. Yeah, I mean, this is interesting, right? Because basically what you're getting is, protectors have roles, right? Exiles do not. Exiles just hold the pain or the grief or the sadness or the fear, right? But there's a lot of hopelessness in the system. So you've had the client go toward this anxious part, and the part fears they'll never get better. So they get stuck at that point. Yeah. One possible issue there is you don't have enough self energy. The client doesn't have enough self energy to move forward in working with this part. This part might feel like you're trying to change it. And so all it does is show you the helplessness, right? When you say my client is stuck in high anxiety and they worry they'll never get better, right? There's parts that are anxious and parts that are anxious about the anxiety ever going away, right? So protectors and exiles involved in this whole cycle here. The path forward is really just the basics. It's just to go slow, use your 6 Fs, really flesh out the different parts that are involved in the anxiety and in the hopelessness. And over time, when you create a little more space in the system and more understanding in the system, more self can come through. But with this client, you're going to have to ask a lot about, their self energy. How are you feeling toward the part? How are you feeling toward the part? How are you feeling toward the part? And if they can't access self energy, you might consider direct access where you're interviewing the part directly. Also working with the body, right? This client is really anxious. They're probably in their head a lot. They're probably in their head a lot, so to speak, in session. So a good counter to that is using the body. And as you get to know the parts associated with anxiety, asking them, what do they fear will happen? How do they get this job? What do they fear would happen if they didn't do this job, etc. Really just validating and honoring that there's probably really good reason why these parts hold such anxiety. And then the more we honor it, the more likely it is to dissipate on its own. Good question. I'll hang around for one or two more live questions here. If you've got them, put them in the comments. And we'll go from there. Yeah. Thank you all for being here, by the way. We've had up to like 20 people in the room here live, which is really neat. So I enjoy doing that. Don't forget, there's tons of pre-recorded episodes available on both the audio versions and the YouTube channel. Lots of interviews we've had, guests we've had over the past while since we started the show. So lots of content to go back through on your own. And either way, yeah, thanks for being here and being part of the show. As always, let other people know about the show. That's the best way you can help me is, like, subscribe, leave a review wherever you listen, and share the show with other people. That'll help us continue to grow it. And that would mean a lot to me. Yeah. If you've got another question, feel free to add it. I'll give it another second or so. I hope everyone is doing okay, especially just getting through this time of year, whatever that means to you, whatever this time of year kind of brings up for you, can be difficult. And here we are on the other side of January 1st. Okay, I'll do one more question here. Question from writer K is, can IFS help with anxiety of future loneliness as well? Future perceived loneliness as well. Fear of remaining alone and lonely. The short answer is absolutely. And in the case of this fear of loneliness or perceived loneliness, I bet there's a lot of protectors at play here and protectors working hard to try to prevent the loneliness, right? So how do we do that? Well, I make myself more lovable or more shiny or more successful or more attractive or whatever to try to prevent the loneliness. This is a really clear and common set of burdens here. I had a client very early on when I was literally a grad student who a lot of her burdens were around not being pretty enough, right? Despite her physical appearance. And so those fears and the drive to be as pretty as possible were rooted in, of course, the fears of loneliness, right? If I'm not as pretty as possible, people will leave me. I'm not worth anything beyond my looks. That's where a lot of her kind of wounding was around. So as a therapist of any kind, IFS or not, you really have to be holding a working hypothesis of your own. Meaning, what do I think my client's symptoms are connected to, right? In other words, what is my working hypothesis for their pathology? And consequently, what needs to happen in therapy for them to heal? And you're constantly revisiting and revising that working hypothesis. Now, once you've been doing therapy a while, 5, 6, 7, 8 years and beyond, right? You naturally form hypotheses all along the way and you're constantly testing them. You're just doing it implicitly. Other times, like let's say if you go to a consultation group like ours, Pathways to Self, I'm going to have you describe the client and also your working hypothesis. And even that exercise in itself can be profoundly helpful for people to go, this is what I think is going on. This is why I think it's happening. This is what I think needs to happen for them to heal, right? Or achieve their therapy goals or whatever. So making that more explicit can be really helpful in just flexing that conceptualization muscle. Yeah. So IFS can definitely help with this. It's great for what you're describing. All right, I'll do one more question. The question is, are there parts that want to appear to do the work as a way to avoid actually doing the work and manage to get a sense of safety from it? Probably. I'm not sure if I've kind of met them because the idea is parts have good intention and they're trying to help the system. They might be afraid to do the work. Now, do I think they would like blatantly lie or try to deceive? No. I don't find parts to be deceitful for what it's worth. And the Bob Falconers of the world would say the same thing. Bob would probably say parts that are deceitful and trying to like trick you are more like UBs or unattached burdens and whatnot. That's topic for another day. But yeah, parts that want to appear to do the work as a way of actually avoiding. And if they were, like the question I'm asking myself 100 times a session is, what could be good about X? What could be good about X, right? Clients drinking a lot, what could be good about drinking a lot, right? Clients in their head a lot, what could be good about being in their head a lot? That's my way of befriending it, right? Whatever the it is. So if there's parts that avoid doing the work or are scared to do the work or are scared to come to therapy or scared to deepen, right? It's like, what could be good about not deepening? And then I invite those fears and we work with those fears and we try to make those fears explicit. Yeah. Okay, I lied. I'll do one more question because now they're rolling in. The question is, how do you invite a manager that employs avoidance to safeguard an exile from getting stuck to practice exposure? Well, parts have agendas, self does not, right? So if part of the agenda here is to try to get your client to practice exposure, that's going to invite protector responses, right? Parts are like, hold up, this dude's trying to get me to change. Absolutely not. Because they've equated that with bad things happen, right? So trying to get me to do the exposure means bad things are going to happen. And there's some historical reason for that we have to get to know. So one way to just kind of invite all the parts is to do what IFS calls a fire drill and say, as you focus on the exposure work, the therapy work we're doing or whatever, or the fear of flying or the whatever, invite all parts that are associated with the fear of flying or involved in the fear of flying to come forward and just sit here around the table or the campfire or the whatever. And then your job is to get to know them one by one, do some parts mapping, create more understanding in the system, really build that muscle of generating self-energy and bringing it to parts, etc., and just go slow. You're getting protector backlash, right? And the protectors are building walls if you go too fast and the protectors feel like, hold up, who is this person? Why are you trying to change me all of a sudden, right? The way we were doing things was just fine, according to the parts. So how do you invite the manager? You invite it. You tell the client, hey, go ahead and invite that manager, invite that part that helps you avoid, right? That helps you stay safe by avoiding, by not getting on planes or whatever, right? And witness the story of the avoidance, witness the story of when and why and how this started, etc. So if you haven't done enough witnessing, you're going to get backlash. You're going to get stuckness in the work. A lot of the work is witnessing. If you're not even doing IFS, you're just witnessing a client's story or their pain or their grief, you're doing good work. Sometimes witnessing is enough for clients' parts to spontaneously unburden, for them to unblend, for them to unburden, etc. So do not underestimate the power of witnessing. Profoundly important and impactful. How is witnessing not enough, right? Ask yourself that question. If you feel like you need to do more in the session, you're probably blended. A lot of it's just a slow, gentle witnessing. Think about 80-20 rule. That's like the 20% of IFS that produces 80% of the results is witnessing. That's my perspective. And of course, I'm just one dude, but I'm one dude that you have tuned into. So there you go. Mary says, amen. I received a session today and received so much relief in unblending just from the complete witnessing. Yeah. There you go. Writer K says the power of witnessing. Wow, that was such a strong and helpful statement. Good. I'm really glad that helped. Apparently I'm passionate about that witnessing piece. So there you go. I just see a lot of therapists trying to do too much and trying to prove their worth and earn their session fee and all that, myself included. And so in this new year, envision doing less. What would happen if you did less? What would happen if you did 10% less or 80% less in session? Would your clients still heal? I bet they would heal even more profoundly, even faster. And they would attribute the healing more to themselves than to the therapist, which is profound and truly empowering. That word has lost meaning, but truly empowering. Okay, maybe I'll end on a high note there since people are liking my soapbox about witnessing. So we'll call it there. I'll do this again next week. We're continuing to do it weekly for as long as people show up. So thank you for being here. If you want to submit questions, you can just join live like this. This is a great way to do it. If you want to submit ahead of time, you can email support@johnclarktherapy.com. If you want to do me a huge favor and come on live with me and do some live consulting, get some free consulting, that'd be even better. If you want to hop on video with me, if you're feeling courageous, that's really what I want to do with the show, is like a live call-in show where people call in and get my help in that way. So that's really where I'm trying to take this show right now, or at least this format of the show. We still have interviews and stuff like that and sessions and demos, whatever. But this is what I want to do with this live component, is really have people call in. So if you're brave enough and want to help me out, just email us, support@johnclarktherapy.com to sign up for that, or to submit more written questions ahead of time. So thanks for being here again. Like and subscribe, leave reviews wherever you are listening or watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Thanks again. Bye-bye. Happy New Year.